I left town for 3 weeks, and when I came back, there was a full-size concrete sports court poured straight across the hiking trail on my land. Not near it, not brushing the edge of it, right across it like it had always belonged there. 50 feet wide, painted lines, steel light poles set in fresh concrete. And the worst part wasn't even the court. It was the way my neighbors said, "Oh, we figured you wouldn't mind." I own 11 acres of woodland in western North Carolina, tucked just outside a small mountain town where the mornings are quiet and the nights still feel honest. I bought the land in 2004 after my divorce, when I needed somewhere that didn't feel like it had opinions about me. It's mostly hardwood forest, a spring-fed creek, and a half-mile hiking trail that curves through the property like a lazy thought. That trail's been there since the 70s, long before I showed up. It's documented in my survey, protected under a conservation easement that keeps it preserved as native habitat. No commercial use. No structural development. No permanent construction. That's the deal. I've spent 20 years maintaining that land, clearing stormfall, replanting native species, working with a local conservation officer named Marty who takes the easement rules more seriously than most people take church. I don't say that in a preachy way. I just mean the land matters to me. It's not empty space. It's not unused. It's alive. Then last spring, a couple from out of state bought the estate bordering my southern line. They renamed it immediately, called it The Haven. That should have been my first clue. Their names were Caleb and Nora Whitmore. Early 40s. Tech money, from what I heard. Sold a startup in Austin. Wanted a slower, intentional life. That's how Nora described it the first time we met, smiling like she'd rehearsed the line. I was clearing a fallen maple off my trail when Caleb jogged over from his property, brand new trail shoes still bright white. "Hey man," he said, cheerful, almost breathless. "Is this all yours?" "Yep," I said, wiping my hands. 11 acres. He whistled. "That's incredible. We just closed next door. We're trying to build something special here. Community. Wellness. You know." I nodded politely. I've lived long enough to know that when someone says community, they usually mean something that involves other people adjusting their lives. He asked about the wildlife, the deer, whether the trail was open to neighbors. I told him it was private, under conservation protection, and he smiled like that was adorable. "Of course," he said. "Totally respect that." 9 weeks later, I flew to Spain to visit my sister and her kids. I was gone 22 days. I remember because I kept counting sunsets over there, thinking about how different the light felt in my woods back home. When I pulled into my driveway after the red-eye flight, I noticed something strange before I even parked. There was a faint hum in the air. Not birds. Not wind. Electrical. I walked down toward the southern stretch of the trail, still dragging my suitcase behind me, and I stopped so hard I actually felt dizzy. Concrete. A massive rectangular slab cutting clean across the trail. Freshly poured. Painted with regulation court lines. 2 adjustable hoops installed at each end. For industrial light poles anchored in reinforced footings. The base gravel still spilled into my undergrowth. For a second, I genuinely thought I was hallucinating from jet lag. I actually laughed. Just one short, disbelieving breath. Then I walked up to it and touched the surface. It was real. The court didn't just overlap the trail. It erased it. The entire system of switchbacks feeding into that section had been leveled to pour the foundation. They had carved out a piece of my forest like it was a backyard renovation. I called Caleb. He answered on the second ring, upbeat as ever. "Hey neighbor. Welcome back. You poured a sports court on my hiking trail." There was a beat. Not confusion. Just a pause to choose tone. "Oh," he said lightly. "We thought that was just deer path. The contractor said it was perfect flat ground. We figured nobody was really using it." "I was using it," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "It's protected land. There's a conservation easement filed with the county. You built on my property." Another pause. This one sharper. "Well," he said, and the warmth drained out. "If there's a misunderstanding, we can look at surveys. But our team did due diligence. You didn't talk to me. We didn't think we needed to." There it was. Not hostility. Not yet. Just assumption. "I have the survey," I said. "I can send it." "Sure," he replied, tone shifting colder. "And if you feel strongly, you can have your attorney reach out." Have your attorney reach out. I hung up and stood there staring at that slab like it was some kind of monument to entitlement. What bothered me wasn't just the concrete. It was the speed. You don't clear forest, level ground, bring in trucks, pour reinforced concrete, and install lighting in under 3 weeks without knowing exactly what you're doing. This wasn't an accident. It was a decision. That evening, I walked the perimeter with my old survey in hand, double-checking boundary markers. Iron pins still intact. Ribbons I tied years ago still faded on tree trunks. The line was exactly where it had always been. The court was 10 full feet inside my property. 10 feet doesn't sound like much until it's concrete. I barely slept that night. I kept replaying our first conversation. Community. Wellness. Totally respect that. By morning, the anger had cooled into something steadier. Resolve. I called my attorney, Daniel Harper. He's not flashy. Drives a pickup. Specializes in land use and environmental law. I've known him 15 years. He came out the next afternoon, walked the trail, studied the slab in silence, then crouched to check the rebar pattern where the edge chipped. They didn't just mess up, he said quietly. They committed a violation. That easement is binding. This structure can't legally exist here. So what happens? I asked. He stood up, dusting off his jeans. We give them a chance to remove it. And if they don't, we go to court. As he left, I heard music drifting from the direction of the court. Laughter. A basketball bouncing. They were already using it. And that's when I realized this wasn't going to be a misunderstanding. It was going to be a fight. By that Saturday, they turned it into an event. I woke up to the thump of bass rolling through the trees, low and rhythmic. Not loud enough to call the sheriff over, but loud enough that it didn't belong in a forest at 8 in the morning. When I walked down toward the southern edge again, I could see SUVs lined up along the gravel access near their property. People in athleisure. Folding chairs. A cooler. Caleb had strung up a temporary banner between 2 of the light poles that read Haven Hoops Invitational in big white letters. On my land, there were maybe 20 people out there. Kids shooting. 2 guys running half court. Nora stood near a folding table handing out green smoothies like she was hosting a fundraiser. For a minute, I just stood in the trees watching, and I remember thinking how surreal it felt, like I'd wandered into someone else's life. Nobody looked over at the forest. Nobody seemed even slightly concerned that the edge of that concrete sat in the middle of protected woodland. I stepped out onto the slab. The ball stopped bouncing. Caleb jogged over, grinning, sweat on his forehead. Hey, you made it. We were going to invite you once we got settled. You need to shut this down, I said. He blinked like I'd told a bad joke. Shut down what? This. All of it. It's on my property. He wiped his hands on his shorts, still smiling, but tighter now. Daniel, right? Look, we reviewed the county map. It's ambiguous along that line. We're working off a professional survey. I have one too, I said. And mine's been recorded for 2 decades. A few of the guests were watching now, that awkward stillness when people realize something adult is happening. Caleb lowered his voice. We've already invested a lot into this. We're planning youth leagues, charity tournaments. This adds value to the area. It violates a conservation easement. He exhaled slowly, like I was the one being unreasonable. It was overgrown brush. We improved it. Improved it. That word landed heavier than the concrete. 5 days, I said. My attorney will send formal notice. Remove it. He laughed once under his breath. You're serious. Completely. His smile disappeared. Then lawyer up. I turned and walked back into the trees with the sound of the ball bouncing behind me again, louder this time, almost defiant. Daniel moved fast. He pulled my deed, the original easement documentation, the GIS overlays, everything. He even contacted Marty, the conservation officer, who showed up 2 days later in his state truck and stood staring at the slab like someone had parked a yacht in his living room. This is a direct violation, Marty said. No permits were issued for this parcel. None could have been. Daniel drafted a formal demand letter giving them 5 days to demolish the structure and restore the land. It was firm, but not dramatic. Straight facts. Clear consequences. Their response came from a Raleigh law firm I recognized by name. Sleek letterhead. Confident tone. They claimed boundary ambiguity. Claimed the land had been unused. Claimed the development provided community benefit. They offered me unlimited access to the court as a gesture of goodwill. I remember reading that line twice. Unlimited access to the court. On my land. Daniel didn't even sigh. He just folded the letter once and said, We file for injunctive relief. If you've never been in a legal fight, There's this strange limbo phase where life looks normal from the outside, but underneath everything is tension. You mow your grass. You make coffee. You check email. And at the same time, affidavits are being prepared with your name on them. While the paperwork moved through the system, Caleb escalated. They installed brighter bulbs in the light poles. Night game started. I'd be sitting on my porch around 9, and suddenly the forest would glow like a high school stadium. Laughter echoing. Sneakers squeaking on concrete. One evening I walked down again, not to argue, just to document. I took photos, measured distances, recorded decibel levels with an app Daniel suggested. Caleb spotted me and walked over, ball tucked under his arm. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," he said quietly. "It's already big," I replied, gesturing around. He shook his head. "You've lived here alone for 20 years. Don't you think it's time this place evolved?" There it was. Not about the court. About philosophy. "You don't get to evolve my property," I said. He studied me for a moment. "This town needs energy. Investment. We're bringing that. You're bringing floodlights into protected woodland." He smirked slightly. That's one way to frame it. The hearing was set 4 weeks later. In those weeks, I learned more about Caleb than I ever wanted to. Through town chatter. Through public records. His startup exit had been lucrative but messy. Lawsuits from former partners. A reputation for aggressive expansion. He didn't like obstacles. He reframed them. To him, that trail wasn't heritage. It was underutilized space. To me, it was the reason I bought the land. The morning of the hearing, I felt calmer than I expected. Daniel met me on the courthouse steps with a thick folder under his arm. Inside the courtroom, Caleb and Nora sat with their attorney, polished and confident. Caleb nodded at me like we were about to negotiate a parking spot dispute. The judge assigned to the case was Judge Elaine Whitaker, known locally for her background in environmental law before taking the bench. She wasn't theatrical. She was precise. Daniel presented first. Survey maps projected onto a screen. Easement language highlighted. Photographs of the court's placement. Marty testified briefly about the violation. Then their attorney argued community benefit, boundary confusion, good faith development. He used phrases like reasonable reliance and shared use potential. Judge Whitaker asked one question that cut through everything. Was a boundary confirmation conducted directly with the adjacent landowner before construction? Their attorney hesitated just long enough to matter. "No, Your Honor." The silence in that room felt like gravity increasing. After reviewing the documents, the judge spoke evenly. The court finds that the structure in question sits within the plaintiff's recorded property boundaries and violates an active conservation easement. Immediate removal is authorized. No stay is granted. Immediate. No stay. That meant no delay. No waiting period. Caleb's jaw tightened. His attorney leaned toward him, whispering urgently. Outside the courtroom, Caleb approached me. "You really want to do this?" he asked, voice low, no smile now. "I didn't pour concrete on your land," I said. "You're destroying something that could have brought people together. You built it without asking." He stepped closer. "This isn't over." I held his gaze. "It is for the concrete." That afternoon, Daniel called a demolition contractor named Luis Ortega, a specialist in concrete removal. Luis came out the next morning, walked the slab, tapped it with a steel rod, and nodded once. "Won't take long," he said. "It's strong, but not stronger than machines." We notified the county and Marty from conservation, so everything was documented. And at sunrise the following day, heavy equipment rolled onto my property. The first crack of the jackhammer echoed through the trees like thunder. The first strike of the jackhammer was almost anticlimactic. After weeks of tension, legal filings, late-night floodlights, and that steady bounce of a basketball echoing through my trees, I half expected something cinematic, thunder splitting the sky, wind whipping through the forest. Instead, it was just a sharp metallic crack, a vibration under my boots, and a thin fracture line crawling across the painted free-throw circle. Luis didn't waste time. His crew moved like they'd done this 1,000 times, because they had. One operator guided the hydraulic breaker with careful precision. Another followed with a skid steer to clear chunks. A third cut through exposed rebar with a torch that hissed and sparked against the gray morning. Concrete doesn't shatter all at once. It gives up in pieces. Slabs split into jagged sections, steel skeleton exposed, gravel base spilling out like bones under skin. I stood off to the side with Daniel and Marty, hands in my jacket pockets, trying to feel something dramatic. Triumph. Vindication. Instead, I felt steady, grounded, like something misaligned was being corrected inch by inch. About an hour in, Caleb's black SUV came flying down his gravel drive. He braked hard near the tree line and jumped out before the engine even died. Nora followed, her face pale. "What the hell is this?" he shouted over the machinery. Louise cut the breaker for a moment. Silence rushed in, broken only by the ticking of hot metal. I stepped forward and handed Caleb a copy of the court order. "Immediate removal," I said. "No stay granted." He didn't take it at first, just stared at the torn-up slab like someone had vandalized his living room. "You could have waited," he snapped. "We're filing an appeal." "There's nothing to wait for," Daniel replied calmly. "The order authorizes removal now." Caleb finally grabbed the papers, scanning them like the words might rearrange themselves into something more convenient. "This is destruction of property," he said. "It's restoration of property," Marty corrected quietly from behind us. That's when Caleb lost the polished tone. The entrepreneur smile, the community builder language, all of it evaporated. "You've been sitting out here alone for 20 years, he said to me, voice shaking with anger. "And the second someone tries to build something meaningful, you tear it down." "Meaningful to who?" I asked. "To people," he shot back. "This forest is people," I said. "Just not the kind that clap." For a second, nobody spoke. Luis restarted the breaker. The sound drowned out whatever Caleb might have said next. They stayed there for another 30 minutes, watching as the court they'd spent, I later learned, around $48,000 building, turned into rubble. At one point, Nora stepped toward me. "We thought you'd be reasonable," she said, softer, almost pleading. "We wanted to create something positive." "You skipped the part where you ask," I replied. She looked down at the cracked paint beneath her feet and didn't answer. By late afternoon, the slab was reduced to fragments loaded into dump trucks. The rebar had been cut and hauled away. The light poles lay horizontal in the dirt, wires coiled like dead vines. Luis's crew excavated the compacted base gravel until they reached natural soil again, careful not to disturb surrounding root systems. Marty walked the area twice, inspecting depth, nodding approval. "Once you reseed with native ground cover," he told me, "this'll recover fine." The forest felt different already, quieter, like it had been holding its breath. Caleb tried one last move. 2 days later, I was served with notice that he was suing me for damages, claiming wrongful destruction of improvements and financial loss. $47,000 plus associated costs. I remember sitting at my kitchen table reading the filing and laughing, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. When someone sees land as leverage, they see every loss as something to invoice. Daniel wasn't concerned. "He can file," he said. "That doesn't mean he wins." The hearing on his claim was brief. Judge Whitaker didn't entertain theatrics. She reviewed her own prior ruling, listened to a short argument from Caleb's attorney about reliance and good faith expenditure, then looked over her glasses and said, "The defendant constructed a permanent structure on land he did not own and in violation of a recorded conservation easement. The removal was lawful and authorized." Claim dismissed. Then she added something that surprised even me. Plaintiff is awarded reasonable legal fees. $12,300. Caleb didn't look at me when we walked out of that courtroom. He stared straight ahead, jaw tight, Nora a step behind him. Life didn't explode after that. There were no dramatic confrontations in the grocery store. No viral town hall meetings. Just a subtle shift. The night game stopped, obviously. The floodlights were gone. The Haven banner never went back up. A for sale sign appeared on their property 6 months later. I won't pretend I felt sorry for them, but I also didn't feel victorious in the way people imagine. What I felt was protective. Of boundaries. Of quiet agreements we don't always say out loud. There's this idea floating around now that unused space is wasted space. That if land isn't producing, hosting, monetizing, entertaining, then it's somehow failing. Caleb believed that. Deeply. To him, my trail was an opportunity waiting for initiative. To me, it was already complete. A few weeks after the demolition, I walked the restored section at dusk. The soil had been leveled. Native seed spread. The scars still visible, but softening. Deer tracks already crossing through. I stopped where the free throw line used to be and listened. No bass. No sneakers. Just wind moving through hardwood leaves. And I realized something that surprised me. This whole thing hadn't just been about property. It had been about pace, about whether everything quiet needs to be amplified, about whether community means participation or permission. Caleb thought he was improving the land. I thought I was defending it. Maybe in his mind, I'm the villain in this story, the stubborn recluse who crushed a dream of youth leagues and charity tournaments. Maybe he tells it that way over drinks somewhere new. But here's what I know. If he had knocked on my door before pouring that concrete, if he had walked the boundary with me, asked what the easement meant, listened instead of assuming, we might have found common ground. Maybe not a sports court, but something. Instead, he treated my silence like vacancy. And that's the part that stuck with me. So now I'm asking you, if someone builds something for the community on land that isn't theirs, does the intention matter? If the result brings joy to some but violates the rights of another, where do you draw the line? Was I right to tear it down immediately? Or should I have compromised for the sake of neighborhood harmony? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more than you think. And if you've ever dealt with a boundary dispute, a neighbor who overstepped, or a situation where doing the legal thing didn't necessarily feel like the easy thing, I want to hear that too. Because out here in the woods, the lines are clear on paper. It's people who make them complicated.